My name is Brittany Grant. I'm the Director of Business Development at The Hill, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's event, Affordable Housing and the American Dream. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Wells Fargo, for underwriting this morning's program. For many Americans, particularly African Americans and Latinos, the process of buying a home presents more challenges than usual. Studies show that the rates of minority home ownership continue to lag significantly behind those of their white counterparts. What can be done to combat the racial inequalities that continue to pervade the home buying process? What policies can leaders in Washington and those in the private sector put in place to help ensure that every American can have an equal chance of owning a home, a long-considered central pillar of the American dream? This morning, during National Home Ownership Month, we will be joined by a pair of congressional leaders on these issues, as well as a panel of thought leaders in the housing space. We will also hear from Dr. Ben Carson, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, via a video interview to learn more about the administration's work to make housing more accessible and affordable for all Americans, regardless of their background or zip code. But before we kick things off, a few housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here in the museum, we are live streaming on thehill.com, as well as the Hill's Facebook page. So please keep your phones on silent throughout the program, but we encourage you to engage in the conversation on social media. You can do so by following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at The Hill Events, and join the conversation using the hashtag #TheHillAffHousing. We will be taking questions from the audience during the program, so please be sure to look out for members of our team with handheld mics. And finally, you will receive an electronic survey following the conclusion of today's event. At The Hill, we are always eager to hear how we can make our events more dynamic, so I encourage you to take a few moments to provide your feedback on today's program. So with all of that said, let's dive right in. It is my pleasure to welcome Congressman Emanuel Cleaver and Steve Stivers, co-chairs of the Congressional Public Housing Caucus, for a conversation on bipartisan efforts on Capitol Hill to make housing more affordable for minorities. Congressman Stivers, a Republican representing Ohio's 15th Congressional District, currently serves on the Financial Services Committee. Throughout his 4 terms in the House, Congressman Stivers has focused on reforming our housing system and helping low-income families in their efforts to own a home. Congressman Cleaver, a Democrat representing Missouri's 5th Congressional District, has been a leading congressional advocate for federal affordable housing for minorities. Throughout his 7 terms in the House, Congressman Cleaver serves on the Housing, Community Development, and Insurance Subcommittee of the Financial Services Committee. Joining the congressman on our stage is Steve Clemons, the Hill's editor-at-large. Steve, over to you.
Good morning. Am I on? Yes, I'm on. Hey, guys, how are you? Good to see you.
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Let me ask you, Steve, Congressman Stivers, to start off, telling us whether you believe in the notion that there is an affordability of housing crisis today.
There is an affordability crisis and a supply crisis. So I live in Columbus, Ohio.
What's the DEFCON level?
It's pretty high. So I live in Columbus, Ohio. We just became a larger city than San Francisco. We have 50,000 units short in Columbus, Ohio today, and we have between 10 and 25,000 people moving in every year. So the crisis is bad and getting worse. And for people that need workforce housing, affordable housing, it's worse because the developers are building more expensive units, both multifamily and single family, but it's hard to build affordable housing because of lots of constraints, including some driven by our local communities.
So I don't mean anything facetious by this, but isn't that a sign of success?
It's good, except if you don't have access to housing, then it's a problem. And we are victims of our success in some ways, but also the housing stock and the supply and home building has never rebounded from 2008. So we are not building as much new stock as we used to. And in the affordable space, we need a lot of innovation. I just was last week at the Innovative Housing Showcase. Did anybody go to that on the mall?
Yeah, it was great. We were just talking about it.
It was really cool. Did anybody see the tiny home and live in it, and the opportunity to live in a shipping container, which didn't sound too exciting until I got inside it, and some of the manufactured housing that looked really good, but it was really affordable. And so I think there are some innovations going on that can help with it. It's more than public housing. We need public housing. We need to make Section 8 more accessible to people. We also need to make it less of a hassle for building managers. So HUD needs to, I think, inventory their processes and say, gee, why are we having a problem getting people to sign up to
Right.
supply Section 8 housing?
Right.
That's another issue. So there's a whole bunch
Yeah.
of issues around this. And the chairman and I, these are bipartisan issues. The chairman and I agree on 90%
Well, we'll get to
of
where
what
you
needs
disagree
done.
in a minute.
Yeah.
But let me
Well,
ask Chair.
and I want to focus on where we agree.
I know what
because
you want to
that's
focus
where
on.
That's where
Yeah.
we'll get things done.
But Chairman Cleaver, let me ask you. I mean, you recently won a distinguished award for your contributions on the housing front, low-income housing, and trying to erase the gap, if you will, between what those of color and their housing assets like compared to essentially the Caucasian white housing crowd. And I was very impressed with your comments, and I'd like you to share with the audience, why is this housing issue one that burns so hard for you?
Well, I didn't live in a house with indoor plumbing or electricity until I was almost 8. And I lived 26 minutes from the Omni Hotel in downtown Dallas. That's where I was born. And finally, my father was able to get us out of there, but we moved into public housing. And we stayed in public housing about almost 6 years. My father was able to buy a house in an area where they were going to build a shopping center. And so the house was moved to an African-American community. And my father is in front of that house probably right now working in the yard today. But you know, for me, it's not an intellectual issue. It's not even really that political. It's an issue that many Americans face. And the strange thing that I'm having difficulty getting across to people, and it is that rural America and urban America are so similar that there's absolutely no reason that there's not some kind of coalition. In my district, I represent half my district is rural, and if you take the rural district, any school in the rural district, they will have a higher percentage of people on the federal free lunch program than in the urban core. It's not dramatically different, but it's higher. And so I have let's take Marshall, Missouri. There hasn't been a new house built there going on 11 years. I said the same thing with Higginsville and Excelsior Springs and Richmond and Slater and Concordia and Odessa, Oak Grove. And so we have a housing crisis. I know what it is to have to live in a decrepit house, albeit clean, but it was nonetheless decrepit. And so I recognize the role that the various roles that must be played if we're going to ever eradicate this problem. Affordable housing it would be in my top 3 domestic issues. One of the most significant and serious problems the country is facing.
I had the privilege of interviewing Anthony Fox, former Secretary of Transportation, a number of times, and he was a former mayor and shared with me that there were several generations where the investments that we made in urban infrastructure, in freeways, essentially reinforced racism, bias, the bigotry of society, and it's very hard. And as we think about the world we want to be in 5, 10 years from now, we not only have to undo that, we have to redo it. And I guess my question to you is, in housing, how much of that bias is still part of the world of finance today, of opportunity, of way people are steered? Let me start with you to sort of say, what do we have to pull out of the way to get rid of the discriminatory parts of our housing ecosystem?
Well, some of it is intentional. A great deal of it is unintentional. When we built the freeways, we with great intentionality. Yeah, we destroyed neighborhoods. We separated people, and people don't like to cross freeways.
Right.
And or roads. Period. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson, with this great idea, created a new federal department cabinet level called the Housing and Urban Development Department. And the goal was to correct all of those problems that we had created.
How's HUD doing?
I mean, we still have it. It's still there. But keep in mind, there's some things that have changed. For example, we have under President Reagan, we created a new policy that we would build no new public housing. And what people don't realize is that policy is still in existence. So we created what's called a one-for-one replacement, where you can only build a public housing unit to replace a public housing unit. Like, for example, we did that in New Orleans after Katrina. And so we're obviously just, my colleague is right, Section 8 certificates are down, but they're not going to be able to be, they'll never be sufficient because, right now we're at maximum in terms of the money being spent on public housing because we can't create any more housing and Congress wouldn't fund any more money to do it. We'd have to change the policy. We've got some serious problems, and some of them are almost intractable unless Congress does something revolutionary.
Steve, you're in this too, and I know that you care about housing and would love to hear why this is a burning issue for you as well. But to kind of come at it, I was at the mall event, which the National Association of Home Builders put together with HUD and some other underwriters, and I was blown away. But I realized when I was there that I guess the thing that hit me was we can talk about housing, and you guys co-chair this caucus together and whatever. But you can be the proverbial frog in the pot. You guys can be doing great things, but if the financial sector is undermining you, if other parts of the system are, so how do you get your head around the ecosystem of the things that have to be fixed? Or am I wrong? Can the Housing Committee and can what you guys are doing, sort of lead in a way that forces these other jurisdictions to play along? Or do you have a frog in the pot problem?
I think it is an ecosystem, but I think we can lead, and I think we can use our bully pulpit and other things. I think one of the big problems in affordable housing is the finance system, and the people who have not had access to credit, don't have credit, will never get credit because the way the credit scoring system works. And there's some new innovations that get people scores based on the things they already have, like utility bills and cell phones and whether they pay those on time, to start to build a credit score that today your traditional credit score doesn't count those things. And so if you've never had credit, you can never get credit, which is problematic at best for millions of Americans.
So you see a tilt in the right direction.
It's starting to move in the right direction, but those alternative scoring systems are still not mainstream yet. And so I think it's something that we have to, it's one of the big things I think we have to work on. And we learned in 2006, 7, and 8, not everybody is ready to buy a home, and we shouldn't assume that everybody's ready. Joyce Beatty and I have a bill that'll be marked up this week. It's Joyce's bill, and I'm a co-sponsor, that will encourage anybody that's getting an FHA underwritten loan to get credit counseling ahead and get home counseling, sort of financial literacy training, and then give them a discount for that on their upfront cost of their FHA guarantee, which I think is a good policy. It's something that will encourage people to be an informed homeowner, understand what they're getting into, which is really, really important. So I think we've got a lot of work to do to help people be ready, but we also have to make sure the ecosystem allows people to use it as a ramp. When the stairs are, 6 feet tall, it's hard to climb a 6-foot stair. We need to make it a ramp or stairs that people can walk up so that we can allow people to improve their station in life. That's what I think we need to do to fix the housing finance system so that it's more inclusive for a lot of people.
Mr. Chairman, if you were to move 3 needles in this equation of home ownership, and whether they're in your jurisdiction or not, although everything's in your jurisdiction, you get to do anything you want as a House member, I think. But beyond your committee, or in your committee, what are the 3 things you can do to move the needle on this topic so that we're celebrating inclusive home ownership in this country rather than lamenting where we are?
I think, first of all, I need about 42 more Stivers. And then I think and I'm not being funny. I actually think we need some people who have fresh vision about housing and a fresh and clear picture. Number two, this problem is not going to be resolved without multiple jurisdictional cooperation. We've got to have the federal government involved, we've got to have the state government involved, and we've got to have the local government. Federal government, LIHTC, we've already reduced the amount of money that could be used in low-income tax credits, the tax bill actually reduced the number, the amount of money that's going to be available.
Effectiveness of the rate, right?
Yes.
Because the tax rate went down, so the leverage is less.
And then we have the Housing Trust Fund, which comes out of the FSHA, Federal Housing, the parent company, parent entity for the GSEs, for Fannie and Freddie. They take money out of that, and it's divided around the country in what's called a Housing Trust Fund. So we've got to have LIHTC, we have to have the Housing Trust Fund. And frankly, we've got to put more money in the Community Development Block Grant Program because as a former mayor, it's the most flexible amount of federal dollars you can get, and most of it will go for housing. And then we've got to deal with the whole gentrification issue. I'll tell you something very quickly. One term before Charlie Rangel retired, I organized a group of people to go to New York to campaign for him. And so I got early in the morning, a number of members of Congress up there, and we're walking all over Harlem. So I'm over talking to a group of guys sitting around, and I introduced myself, and one of them actually knew my cousin, so I became important quickly. Eldridge, he was a former Black Panther, so he knew Eldridge. So we started off good friends. So I said, guys, we got to get up. Everybody's got to turn out and vote for Charlie Rangel. So this guy says, well, I'm not voting for him. And I'm stunned. And I said, why? And he said, look at Harlem. And I said, it's looking good to me. And he said, that's what I'm talking about. He said, Bill Clinton's office is right down the street here. And he said, we can't afford to live here anymore. And he said, no, I'm not voting for Charlie Rangel, anybody. So you go back to the point earlier, I mean, people are getting pushed out of communities, and so they're becoming angry at what many would call progress.
So what do you do to balance that? You know, the former mayor of Dallas who just stepped down, Mike Rawlings, I used to talk to him about what his dashboard as a mayor was, and he went and, actually he didn't have one the first time I interviewed him. The second time he had an electronic dashboard, and one of the things he built in were real estate prices in South Dallas. And he says, I know I'm doing my job right when real estate prices in South Dallas are rising, which means I'm creating demand, I'm creating investment, I'm getting people to come in more, but that leads to the gentrification problem. So how do you solve both, raising a community, but then also looking at how you create incumbent affordability?
And I think we may have misdiagnosed the problem slightly. The chairman and I may disagree on this part.
Finally.
But I think the problem is not gentrification. The problem is minority home ownership.
Right.
If you're a homeowner in a gentrifying neighborhood, you do well as the neighborhood gentrifies. The problem is because home ownership is so low in those areas, people get pushed out. If we can encourage and allow for home ownership in those areas, then as neighborhoods get improved, the property values go up, and the homeowners who happen to live there get equity. That's a great thing. That's the American dream. That's what we all believe in. So I think we may have misdiagnosed the problem slightly here, because gentrification is only bad when you don't own, and you got to pay the rent.
Chairman Cleaver, where do you most disagree with this guy?
Well, with the Kansas City Chiefs versus Cleveland, but I think many of you probably have seen these. If you're in your hometowns, there are signs up. We buy ugly houses.
Right.
That's like step one for gentrification, because somebody's living in a rundown house and somebody comes up and says,
I'll pay cash tomorrow.
And they get and they're gone. Well, they come in and rebuild that house, and that person who moved out nor his cousin can
afford
move in it.
That's right.
And so what we have to do is, and this is where we have to have municipal government involved because they approve the licenses and so forth.
Right.
They've got to say, if you're going to build new housing anywhere in the urban core, and they can do it by zones, you've got to have a certain number of low to moderate income housing. You know, we'll give you a permit. You got 25 units, 5% or whatever must be low to moderate income, and you can't go this side. We did it in Kansas City in a project where the builder didn't like it, but it preserved the original neighborhood. Well, a Hispanic neighborhood in Kansas City, gone. It's been there for 150 years, gone. Big, beautiful homes are now all around there. And I hate even talking about it because it feels like I'm against progress. And I'm not. I'm for, real inclusion.
Yep.
Let me just ask you guys real quick, and we got a few minutes. I want to make sure I get the audience to ask their questions.
And I want to talk about community development block grants because I think they can be part of the solution.
You support them?
I do support them 100%, but I think, so 25% to 35% of a home's cost, an affordable home's cost, is driven by the local community's zoning and building codes.
Right.
And they're written in such a way as to make it hard to do affordable housing. If we encourage communities through the formula of community development block grants to change their codes to allow for affordable housing, I think they would do it, and you'd see a reduction in cost of housing because it drives a ton of the cost of
Let's
housing,
go lightning round
along
here.
with impact fees, which are another problem. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go lightning round here real quick. There's a growing clamor, and as best I can tell, it's in certain quadrants in both parties on disposing of the mortgage interest deduction. Support or don't support?
Preserving it?
Yeah, preserving it or killing it.
Oh, we've got to preserve it.
Okay.
I support preserving
You're
it.
preserving it, so you're there. And then on the issue of when I look at the price of housing today, and you kind of look at the various dimensions, a lot of people think, well, it's your construction teams or whatever. It also is regulation. It's also the price of Canadian lumber. It's also water-related regulations.
By tariff,
So I'm interested in, are you with the president on his trade agenda, which drives up a lot of the costs?
No.
Congressman Cleaver, are you with President Trump on his trade agenda? No. Okay, there we go. It's interesting. We just made news there, guys. And I would also ask, one of the things that really interests me is whether we're talking about, well, I love what you just said about preserving communities, and I actually strongly agree with you. On the other hand, I always worry when we're doing these events, we're talking sort of about yesterday's issues in a way. What is housing, brick and mortar? But as we look at everything in the future, part of it, you see software companies that used to make widgets that are now saying we're a data company. And I'm wondering whether the future of the home is a different conception where the pipes, the infeeds, the kinds of things that you imagine what having a home means in 10 or 15 years is not a white picket fence. It may be a much more turbocharged version of broadband plus. And I'm interested in whether or not we need to redefine for a future what we're sculpting to get the home right as a concept that we're trying to get in. Because you go to Ohio, and I've done a lot of programs in Ohio, the digital divide there is phenomenal. People don't understand that we do not have 25% of kids in Ohio, particularly in the Appalachian areas, do not have regular access at home to broadband. So are we negotiating and thinking about the wrong versions of what a home is? Congressman?
Well, yeah, I think the 21st century home has to be dramatically different because, I represent rural areas as well. They're also having the same problem. But in the urban core, you'll have people going, young people who are serious students, going to McDonald's to do their homework because they don't have Wi-Fi. They're going to McDonald's or any place they can go. So we've got to think 21st century, and it's difficult. I'm glad I didn't have to do it because I'm not a computer person. Not even I just recognize them, but you can't hardly graduate from high school now. You can't do your homework without a computer, and that would be one of the most significant developments we can have, I think. 21st century homes.
Steve?
So I don't think it's our job to figure out what the housing of the future looks like. That's up to the marketplace. Our job is to build a flexible network that works no matter what the future of housing is. And I think those are the kind of decisions we need to make, is not exclude innovation from housing. And I do want to clarify really quickly that on my trade answer, we do have to take on China, but trades need to be a means to an end and not an end among themselves. That's my concern.
Fair clarification. And then final question from me, and I want to go to all of you. In the 08-09 financial crisis, one of the things that evolved, which I found to be myself personally abhorrent, was making the accusation that certain people got into home ownership that shouldn't have been there. They didn't understand it. They put the blame not on those doing credit default swaps as much as they did on people who were all of a sudden with underwater mortgages in this, and particularly communities of color. And so I'm interested, as we talk about expanding home ownership and looking at this as a key asset of wealth building in this country, looking back on that, is there a better way to talk about expanding home ownership to communities that have not been as representative and not fall into that trap again, where they get blamed for actually trying to pursue the American dream?
Well, yeah, I was unfortunately and painfully, I was there from day one through that crisis on the committee, and we had people coming in testifying. Yes, we intentionally directed our efforts toward black and brown communities. I mean, they confessed, and we have it on record. I'm still angry nobody has gone to jail. We almost wrecked the world economy. I'm getting off now, but that still bothers me. But I do think that one of the things we have to do is to start looking at homeownership in a different way and recognize that everyone should not necessarily own a home. I agree with that. Herman Jr., my cousin, I wouldn't sell him a home. I wouldn't give him a home. He doesn't, you know.
We just made news again.
Yeah.
Sorry, Herman.
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Congressman Stivers?
Well, I think, I think it's misdirected to blame the people. We had a system. Does everybody know what a ninja loan is? No income, no job, no assets. We had a system that allowed people to get loans when they couldn't verify they could pay them back.
Right.
And that's a system that was broken. And it was competing on less and less documentation, less and less underwriting.
But you had a lot
more
of people with jobs, with working full time, that still all of a sudden.
So it was, you know, people buying more than they could afford, and it's not all. It wasn't all race. It wasn't all having to do with lower income. It went.
So
it was
are you
huge,
confident that where we
system.
are now, they're not going to repeat that mistake?
I feel confident that our mortgage finance system has been corrected on those points. I think I'd still love to see us do some reform of the GSEs, but frankly, there's no consensus of what to do. So
I think Chairman Cleaver disagrees.
I think it could easily happen again because we did make some repairs. No question, we were able to do some things that stopped folk from doing that. But I'm not so sure that the GSEs, they were bundling mortgages and selling them as securities that were worthless, and I don't feel as comfortable as I would like to that it can't happen again. And because the real cause of it was greed, and I don't think we've stamped that out.
Yep. There was clearly not enough skin in the game of people in the system that I sold somebody a mortgage and I took the fees and then I sent it off to some investor. I had no skin in the game whatsoever. That was a problem. We fixed it mostly, but there may be more we need to do, and we need to pay attention to it.
Thank you both. Let me go to the audience. I'm going to stand for you because I promised somebody the first question. I can't see her, so I'm looking. I'm trying to find you, but since I can't find you, I'm going to go here. Are you out there? Here we go. Yes.
Hello. I have a question about your redefinition, Representative Stivers, about the gentrification and home ownership. If people don't have much of a wage, then if the prices are going up, if people don't have much income,
Much income, got it.
Right.
Yeah, then how do they afford the rising prices?
So the point is to get home ownership up in communities today before they gentrify, and then the whole point is then people will benefit from the communities as communities improve. And so we need to look at home ownership and try to figure out how to improve home ownership now in those communities.
Right up here in front. We got two in front. We'll go to both of you. Ganev. I know his name, so I'll, make it good, Ganev. Yeah.
My name is Ganev. I'm with Thornburn Partners. So my question is, can you weigh in on if companies like Amazon help further divide or help kind of close that gap? And then also, should they be coming into urban areas, rural areas? If you can weigh in on that as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to edit you and so you're talking about Amazon's investment of its headquarters too, and the power. And let's go to this gentleman in the second row, Marissa, right here. But on the broad side of major investment of coming in, where you've got major job creation, but we're seeing right now the very rapid rise of real estate prices in the areas around it. Is that fair, Ganev? Either one of you.
Yeah.
It can have massive impact. So Columbus made the list of the top 10 for the HQ2.
Are you glad you didn't get it?
I'm kind of glad we didn't get it for a couple reasons. It would have been a massive, so I already told you, we're 50,000 units short today. You add 100,000 jobs, some people who would live in Columbus already, some people would come in, and our shortage would have been magnified immediately. We weren't ready for it. I'm not sure anybody's ready for that, but it's those kind of airdrop big chunks of jobs are really significant changes, and you have to be ready for them. We were also competing for Foxconn that went to Wisconsin, and there were a ton of focus around workforce housing in that proposal for us.
Are there any big investors in Columbus that you're glad you got?
Oh, I'm glad we have everybody we get. I want all our companies to do better. I want more companies come in, but a big company like that that would be the single biggest presence in town on day one is a lot to airdrop in, even to a community of almost 1 million people in Columbus right now.
We might need to go back to the future, and that is, there was a time after the turn of the century, major companies would come in, and then the housing would sprout up around the company. And there's a little town in my district called Sugar Creek. It's a Slavic community, and most of them worked at Armco Steel, which was located in Sugar Creek, and housing was built all around it. And I think that in the 21st century style, maybe we need to go back and do that. That if we're going to give some, as a former mayor, if you're going to get tax abatement, look, you got to build a subdivision, and the subdivision has to be market rate, and it has to be affordable. And I think we've got to do something that we've not done before. The government didn't require that. The companies did it because there was a closer relationship between worker and
we're going to go real fast. Last question with this gentleman.
Hi, my name's Don Maxwell, and I appreciate you guys bringing affordable housing crisis up, but I'm a little perplexed because what's really high, and it's in some of you guys' areas, is blight. And I'm seeing, like in Detroit, there's 100,000 vacant properties, 200,000 vacant apartment complex, which could help on Section 8. And it's all across the United States. So what can you do to bring blight up as part of affordable housing?
Fantastic
Cleveland
question.
is big. It's a
fantastic
big
question.
market.
Thank you very much for being. So what do you do about the blight challenge?
Well,
go ahead.
First of all, it's not an easy solution. Parade Park, Kansas City, Missouri, first housing project that was built in Kansas City, 200 empty units right now. So what we need to do, same thing you need to do in Detroit. You got to, if you don't start repairing it, it's going to wreck everything around it. But the problem is that the housing development appraises at $6.5 million, and they're in debt $10 million. Now you show me a developer who's going to come in for that project. So that's where I meant earlier, you got to have federal government coming in. We used to have something called UDAG loans and HUD, Urban Development Action Grants. So that you've got to have federal and state investment. If you don't, I'm in and out of Chicago, Detroit, it's just not going to be fixed.
Blight has to be part of affordable housing as we look at it. because it discourages investment and opportunity in certain areas. And some of these places are a little overwhelming. Like Detroit has lost 300,000 people, and so that's one of the reasons there's a lot of vacant units. There's not as many people in Detroit as there used to be. But talk about a community that has capacity. I've looked at studies. There are a lot of communities that have lost population like that have huge capacity right now that we could and should figure out how to help. And there's things in the private market that you could actually work with the city if they, sell the home for $1 to people that agree to invest and live in it. And then maybe we can come up with some federal program to work those. And then you could maybe see in-migration back to some of those cities that have lost a ton of population, especially in the Northeast and the Midwest.
Max, I really appreciate that question.
Great question.
I would just simply say as we close here, and I'm the interviewer here, but one of the areas that we should have looked at after the 08-09 financial crisis was that if you had banks or financial holders of that debt be able to write that debt down to the real value of the collapsed value of that house and leave families in their homes, but allow them 30 years to write that off theoretically. Take it, write it down in real time here, but figure out a way to get these people to stay in their homes. It was a doable thing, and I just really regret it didn't. So the blight problem became vastly worse. So thank you so much, Congressman Steve Stivers, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, co-chairs of the Congressional Public Housing Council. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Steve, thank you very much. Great.